Hello, leaders of the world. Welcome to Spread Love in Organizations, a podcast for purpose-driven healthcare leaders striving to make life better around the world by leading their teams with genuine care, servant leadership, and love. I'm Naji, your host for this podcast, joined today by Semyon Dukach, managing partner at One Way Ventures, the venture capital fund backing exceptional immigrant tech founders who are building great companies like Brex, Momentous Space, and Chipper Cash. Semyon is a refugee from the Soviet Union and formerly the managing director of Techstars. Prior to Techstars, he was a prolific angel investor and a friend of the startup community. Semyon has made over 100 angel investments, including early investments in Quanergy, smtp.com, and Wanderu. Xconomy lists Semyon as a top angel investor in New England. His philosophy has been to focus on helping his founders at all costs. Prior to becoming a full-time angel, Semyon co-founded several technology companies, including Vert and Fast Engines. Fast Engines was sold to Adero in 2000s. Beyond startup, he is known for leading one of the MIT blackjack teams in the early 90s to beat the casinos. Semyon earned his BS from Columbia University and MS from MIT, both in computer science. It is such an honor to have you with me today.
Thanks for having me.
We would love first to hear your incredible personal story, from immigrating to MIT, beating casinos in blackjack, and now being a VC focused on impact investing in exceptional tech immigrants. It feels like a full circle, but we'd love to hear more about it from you.
Yeah, I started some companies and then I gravitated fairly early in my career towards investing. I realized the customers I wanted to serve were the startup entrepreneurs, and that I enjoyed being involved in multiple things in parallel, and was also fairly good at actually making money at it. So I basically started gradually investing more and more of whatever money I had, and as I started doing better as an investor, I had exits and I rolled it all over. To where, eventually, maybe 12 or 13 years after I started mostly being an investor, I was like one of the most active people in this part of the world in New England. But then actually, I didn't just immediately go to the venture fund. I was recruited to run the Techstars accelerator here in Boston. Which at the time was quite early, but it was still already very successful, had a great track record. It was a much stronger program than other programs like it. And I was, surprised because I've never had to work within any large organization. But it was a little bit of a franchise in that, like the Boston group operated somewhat autonomously at the time. And I took that on. And so that was actually my first kind of semi-institutional investing experience. We had, I guess I ran four groups over 3 years, a total of about 48 or 50 companies. And those have done well as well. And there I really learned more about like mentoring, not just individuals, but doing groups of CEOs, working with the venture capital investors and connecting, people, making it more likely that they can tell a better story and raise the money they need. And it was a little bit of a public-facing role. Now there's a demo days, it's a large gathering of the whole community every year. So, it was fun. And that's when I first dabbled a little bit with not just taking local companies, but bringing some companies over from Europe. Which had mixed results, I would say. But after doing it for a few years, I felt it was a little too comfortable for me. It wasn't as challenging, I wanted to do something of my own from scratch, something more global, something with a mission and impact that I really cared about. Because I think any kind of investing organization, like any other startup, needs to have some purpose other than how much money it's going to make. I think it's a good thing to have. It helps motivate your team. It helps keep people, going through the hard times. And ultimately, if you really believe in what you're doing, you're probably going to do better than folks who lack that belief, right? You're going to work harder. You'll have an easier time recruiting. You'll have better deal flow. So ended up picking this focus on immigrants because, I mean, I am an immigrant, or at least my parents were. I was young, but I came here. We were refugees. I found most of my friends, but also a large number of the startups I invested in as an angel had immigrant founders anyway. And it just seemed like the right time. I mean, Donald Trump was just elected, and there was a bit of a backlash against people coming in, right? So the time seemed right to make a stance and to say, you know what, we're only going to invest in immigrants because immigrants are more likely to build big unicorns than people who are born here, right? It's a very strong filter. When you've gone through what you've gone through in order to move to another country, learn a culture, a language, rebuild your network, it's predictive of resilience and future success. You've gone through more than someone in an equivalent position who had an easier path, who was already born here. In a sense, immigration is almost like your first company. It's like an entrepreneurial thing, right? Like getting yourself resituated is quite a task. And so, yeah, we built the whole fund around that concept. I left Techstars. We raised first 28 million was the first fund, and we invested that and had a bunch of interesting outcomes, and were able to raise a second fund that was twice as big as 57. And we're about halfway through investing that one at this point. So that's what I do today. To be clear, like the angel phase is long over. I don't write angel checks. I'm full-time capital investor right now.
Well, thank you so much, Semyon, for sharing your story with us. I'm going to double-click immediately on the VC impact, and specifically for exceptional immigrants, as you shared. You shared a little bit about the philosophy behind it, so I'm interested if you can give a little bit more your words, insight, how you ended up really thinking immigrants, and really when you started and had this idea where you said, I'm going to move and only invest on immigrant startups and entrepreneurs. You said you had good funds joining you. Was it hard for people to believe it? I'm interested in the reaction about this, because you said you went through the stance in a moment of even like some tension, politically or beyond. So I'm interested how you managed to convince people around it.
I suspect it was probably easier because the people who didn't like what the administration were doing felt angry, and they felt strongly, and they knew that America was built on immigrants, really. America's success at attracting people from all over the world is largely related to how wealthy and successful America is today, right? People know that, and so they were frustrated, and I think it was easier to get their attention. But at the end of the day, like, we decided not to make an impact fund for the purpose of helping the people we invest in, right? Like, of course we help, because that's what we do as investors. We help the companies. You give them money, add value, so they pick your money and not someone else's. But and because that's the fun part. But the selection itself, the act of writing the check, is fundamentally not a philanthropic exercise for us. Like, we're not a fund that invests in people because they're undercapitalized, because they have trouble raising money from others. We're not there to help people who are struggling with fundraising, right? On the contrary, I think, we have our beliefs, we have our passion. We love investing in immigrants. We want to see a world that's more open. We ideally want to see that any person, regardless of wherever they happen to be born, should be able to switch their passports at will and join whatever country they want to be a part of, and all countries should be open to everyone. I mean, obviously not the people who come and commit crime or whatnot, but you should be able to police crime the same way for new arrivals as for existing people. Like, I would like to believe that the random paperwork that you happen to have received when you were born is completely outside of your control, just like your race or gender is outside of your control. And so opportunities should be the same for everybody. And so, we don't like the idea of asking whether these tech immigrant founders are good for America because they create a lot of jobs. Just doesn't interest me at all. Like I don't actually care about the fact that these immigrants create a lot of jobs for America. I mean, it's nice, it's good that the jobs are created, but that's not an argument for why we should allow them to enter the country. The reason we should allow them to enter the country, in my view, is because we believe in equality of opportunity. We believe in human rights. And who the hell are we to ask whether the arrival of this person is going to benefit us economically? It's their right to come and do whatever the hell they want, as long as, they're not harming, as long as they're building, creating, working. Like, everyone should have the same rights. It shouldn't matter where you're born, right? Because that's outside of your control. That's a core part of what we believe. And then we think globally, of course, in general. We tend to, our companies tend to have offshore development because they have come from a country where they understand the culture and it's easier for them to set that up. And there's a lot of other advantages to it. But basically, with our philosophy, we were able to attract some really top immigrant talent, like top founders. Became part of our deal flow. Like, the people sent us really interesting companies, even the ones that maybe the immigration experience was some time ago, and maybe they've already had a successful outcome, and they're like in hot demand, and everybody wants to invest. And often we get allocation in those rounds because we're the only fund who is defined around this concept. And a strong immigrant founder they remember how hard it was for them when they first came. They love the idea that there's a fund for immigrants, right? Like, that they boldly state that, like, immigrants aren't just as good, they like better, they're significantly better, they're the single strongest group, right? For the purpose of determining your probability of building a unicorn, really outside success, which is the only way to get good VC returns, is to invest in those unicorns, right? So it's been a really fun journey. I'm sure some luck was involved, as always, but I think the mission has been really important. Like, our founders are more likely to help each other because they all share this mission. We have a lot of limited partners. We didn't go to institutions. We raised money from, like, basically entrepreneurs who had exits, who had money because they sold their companies, and we have 230 of them altogether. So that's a pretty strong network of people who, many of whom, if not most of whom, are pretty engaged. They want to meet the founders, they want to, like us, they want to get excited about, high energy, younger people who are super smart, who are changing the world, who are very passionate, right? Doing something interesting. Like, it's really fun to be around the kind of startup CEOs that could raise sizable rounds, right? So it's a fun job. And it's a fun community to be a part of. And so that's what we do at One Way.
And with high impact. And I really love how you frame that opportunity should be the same for everybody. Like, some would call it the genetic lottery, actually, where you get born and how, and what you're trying to bring is really this equity, or at least equitable access for people to be able to thrive wherever they were born.
Yeah, and you don't do it by, like, just giving the VC check to every immigrant, obviously. Like, we look for extraordinary people who are building large disruptive businesses. Most of the companies we invest in, like, they're competitive rounds, and they could get their money anyway from someone else. Not all, but most of the time.
So I wanna double click on this, Semyon, because you talked about obviously immigrants, the grit. You talked a lot about resilience as an immigrant already, and this is kind of why you define those as your top-notch entrepreneur. I'm intrigued. What else do you look at, and do you look for in founding teams when you are ready to invest? Is there any key leadership traits, capabilities within the founding team or the lead team of those companies that you really look for to make your final call?
Well, of course. I mean, there's no shortage of immigrant-led startups. It's just an initial filter for whether we're going to take the meeting, or even look at it. Like, we only take 1 out of 50 meetings that come at us, even from immigrant founders, right? and then we invest in one of 20 of those or whatever. So what are the things we look for? It's similar to what other investors look for. The seed. So we seed investors. It's usually the second round, like there's a pre-seed round and then a seed round. Sometimes we do pre-seed. At that stage, the CEO is by far the most important factor, right? Like it needs to be a large market for sure. It has to be a large opportunity. Hopefully, a market that it's not too difficult to grow quickly in. But then we really want the kind of leader who has a vision of the future, who has a thesis, has a belief, a strong belief about how to serve their customers, how the world will change, what their customers really need. They care about their customers and they care about their team. And they're able to articulate this belief, like explain it in a way that can make sense. And when you challenge them, they listen pretty closely to your questions. They don't agree with most of what you say, but they show you how they think and how they take that stuff that you're saying into account. Hopefully, they usually they know much more about their business, their space than we do, just by definition. Even the spaces we focus on, we still don't know as much as a person, spending all their time on one business. So we have these conversations. We look at the team. We look at who they're able to recruit. Like we expect people to bring on like incredibly strong talent. The kind of people who could themselves be a CEO and raise money from other VCs. Not the kind of people who just have like high-paying jobs, but like really strong people. And that those people want to follow this leader just for equity. There's usually minimal salaries in the beginning stages. There's some, but. So this ability to inspire others, right, is really important, and the ability to maintain a real vision while also like listening to skepticism and processing it and like taking it into account, like not having a blind vision where you just don't really want to hear anything, where you think you know it all already. Like you have to be cognizant of what you know and what you don't know. So those kinds of characteristics. And then sometimes when it's like a full seed round, sometimes there's already some revenues. There's always some customers. Even if there's no products, no revenues, there has to be customers, of course. So we talk to the customers when we're leading around. And these days we usually lead. We want to speak to the customers and try to understand, how big this could be, how big a need is it, how many other people in the industry might need it in the way that they do. Just get a sense for, is this going to be a venture scale story? Because like at the end of the day, right, like very few companies actually appropriate for significant venture capital. And while our fund is small, the model is to back unicorns, which usually means that they're going to raise very large rounds from other people later. So we do need it to be, scalable, defensible. Like ideally, there should be some IP, some founder market fit. Like the founder, in addition to just being great, has to be somehow a good fit for what they're doing, for the space that they're in. Those are some of the factors we look at.
I'm gonna take you back in time if we can talk for a couple of minutes about blackjack. I'm intrigued and interested. It might have been like kind of one of the first entrepreneurship journey you had, and you've built company yourself, obviously as along the way. Is there like a common thread or key learnings from those experiences that you took with you as you built companies and as a leader today within your VC?
I mean, of course, blackjack was my first company. It was also my first fund in a sense, because it was more like an investment fund, right? We had investors and players who kind of managed it. We had to keep track of stuff. We modeled probabilities. We generated results. We had pretty good, returns. It was like around over 50% a year kind of returns in blackjack.
Wow. Can you give maybe our audience who don't know you much, like a little bit of a backstory of the blackjack we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I was part of this MIT team that figured out how to beat the casinos at the game and made a few $1 million around the world. I ended up leading one of the two teams. We split off into a couple of groups, and I was sort of the de facto president of one of those groups. Learned many things that applied to my later funds. How to work with people, teams, how to keep people motivated, how to think quantitatively for sure. Like I think I have a pretty quantitative way of approaching most decisions. For example, when our companies raise later stage rounds, we usually, co-invest for our pro rata rights. We'll, either out of fund reserves or we run SPVs when it's larger checks. But even though we usually invest, I always, in every single time, I actually consider selling rather than buying. To me, it's always, it's almost like I should be doing rather the other. I rarely want to maintain my position. I either want to buy or to sell. So I'm trying to be a little bit more objective and less emotional. The initial decision is quite emotional because you have to decide if you trust the founder too. You have to decide, the gut. You often have to listen to your gut, but over time, thinking probabilistically is very helpful, I think. And also, I think blackjack taught me that very few things are impossible. Like even if conventional wisdom says, you can't beat the casinos, obviously, like that's a known fact. Well, we could if we can prove why we can, if we can write a simulator and show that it could work, well, it can actually work no matter what it is. So when a founder tells me that something, they can do something that everyone else says can't be done, and I have some initial reference call saying, this cannot work. It's the physics. It's not going to work. It's impossible. It's bullshit. And then, I'm like, are you sure? Why don't you actually talk to the founder? Like, just double check. And then turns out that there is a way. So just thinking that is first principles kind of thinking. Nothing is impossible unless you can prove it's impossible. Right? Actually demonstrably prove. And I'm sure many other things. We even had investors. Like it was a fund in the sense that there were investors who were just investing. There were people who managed it. There were people who actually played. So it had all those attributes. And I think what it didn't have, like it didn't really create value. Like it was more of an arbitrage. Like we beat the casinos for money, and we spent the money, and like it was our, like we didn't. The casinos never thanked us for beating them, right? We didn't have customers for whom we created value. So we were more like traders or like some kind of hedge fund, or whatever in that sense, than tech investors. So it's much more gratifying, of course, to invest in companies where you can actually help them with advice or with connections or whatnot, and you feel their gratitude and you feel a little bit of the responsibility for their success. Though, of course, 99% of it lies with the team and not the investor, but still, you can make a meaningful impact sometimes, and that's a very good feeling. But yeah, it was my first company and my first fund. And then, I've done okay with my companies. I had like a pretty reasonable exit that got me started in investing, but I did way better as an investor at the end of the day. And, basically, on like 15 years of angel, I was doing like, I don't know, 35, 38% per year returns in terms of actual exits, like cash on cash returns, which for a long period of time, is difficult to pull off. And so far, with Techstars, with one way, I believe I'm maintaining that rough level, which it's challenging. You can't take that for granted. Valuations go up like crazy now. You wonder if it's going to work anymore. Well, now they've gone back down, so that concern is out of the way. But it's more of an art than a science for sure. The venture capital, it's a craft. And it does, I have to say, I think I got pretty lucky a few times in the beginning, because it takes years and years to really know if you're doing the right thing. Like, because a company can take more than a decade to actually generate true value. Like, there's early indications they might raise a bunch of money from someone else, but that could just be a fad. And you only really know when you return capital to your investors or to yourself if you're an angel. And that's just, with that delay, you sort of, you got to do it for 20 or 30 years to have a couple of cycles of feedback, really. So, I mean, I know some people are natural, some people younger, and they're still able to have this amazing sense for it. But generally, it's a long game. And building a venture capital brand, like one way, it's not like a lifestyle kind of fund that's like me and my partners want to run it and then it'll end when we get old. That it's really important to me that it succeeds, that grows, that it becomes like a globally like well-known, strong fund, because I want people to know that by investing in immigrants, we were able to build a large fund, have above market returns, because I think that could be an argument in discourse everywhere about how open should borders be, about how welcoming countries should be to others, right? Like, I want our success in and of itself to make potentially a political point. But yeah, meanwhile, we're just focusing on, of course, generating the best possible returns for our investors, and investing in the very, very, very best immigrants, and not necessarily the ones who need our help. But also, like, I guess I mentioned that a couple of times now, so I do want to say that there's a place in life for like helping people who need help. Specifically, venture capital is not it, in my view. I do have a charitable foundation that I'm a part of, that I'm on the board of, that my wife actually runs full time, and right now it's focused on refugees out of Ukraine. But in general, it's going to be refugees, I think, in other parts of the world, people who fled from wars, and people like that. They need help. We don't invest in them. You just give them money, and hopefully not for too long, so they can get back on their feet. But there's an aspect, there's a place in the world for just philanthropy and helping people who need a hand. And sometimes immigrants do need an extra hand, but one-way ventures isn't that. It isn't that.
Yeah, and well, thanks for kind of separating and really differentiating both. And what you're doing with your VC and investment fund is really also, I love how you're framing it towards this bigger purpose of really showing the world this purpose that you have on immigration. And I love your leadership, how you've put things into contrast, like quant, but also some, gut taking decision, some luck, leadership, vision, but also like going with the flow. You talked a lot about your team, so it's really great learning. And I'll give you now one word, and I would love actually your reaction to it. And the first one is leadership.
Leadership. Effective leader is someone who inspires people to be better than they otherwise would be. The people want to follow a leader because following that person makes them be better people, right? People want inspiration. I mean, a leader has to have strong views, they have to have vision, and they have to listen to the people who are following them and stay in tune with them and not lose them.
What about equity?
Equity? Like as in companies, or you mean like equity like fairness, or equity like stock options?
Equity like fairness.
Like égalité, fraternité kind of equity. I think there should be equity of opportunity. I think people shouldn't be limited from doing whatever they can effectively achieve. They should be judged based on their results, not on their results. There's obviously a lot of old prejudices and politics in the world, and generally, I feel that we need to overcome them by letting people do what they want, and not necessarily in other ways. I've already spoken about borders. Of course, you have to come in peace. Having been very involved with the war in Ukraine, the last thing I want to suggest is that like Ukraine not have any borders, with Russia. Like clearly they need much stronger borders with like much bigger walls. If people are going to come in and roll their tanks in and rape and murder people. But as long as people want to interact peacefully, interact in a way that benefits everybody, that's based on freedom and voluntary contracts. I really think everything should be open. And as far as equity, the other equity, I don't know, you didn't ask about that one, but
As I was asking, I was sure your VC mind will go into equity. So I'd love
yeah,
to hear your thoughts also on it.
on equity versus debt. I mean, I think the best part about when it works well, a capitalist society allows for easy formation of new businesses, and people who work for big companies and don't really own them, they just get cash bonuses or whatever at some point. There's nothing like owning something, nothing like being ultimately responsible for its success and getting the full benefit from its success. It's very motivating. I think generally people do best when they act as owners of whatever it is that they're involved with. So I certainly believe that new companies should spread that ownership very broadly. That like probably every serious employer of a company should have some equity, some stock options, some way to benefit from the real upside. I think it's very important.
The third one is breaking Vegas.
Breaking Vegas. Well, I don't know if we actually really broke it. I think we just nibbled at the edges a little bit. I mean, we won a few $1,000,000, but like they make billions every year. Like it wasn't that big a deal. Of course, they hated us because it humiliates them to think that someone can actually beat them. But
Did they do a good job relating it in the movie for you?
well, the movie was the Kevin Spacey movie was quite fictionalized. But there's not other films on the History Channel that are more accurate. But even the Kevin Spacey movie, well, the characters have all changed. It captures the essence of what it felt like, for sure. It definitely captures, the sense that we're doing the impossible. We're a team. We're the good guys. They're the bad guys. Like all of that was definitely part of it. And I'm really glad I did it. It was an interesting experience. I kind of regret spending 3 or 4 years on it. I think would have been a better 3 or 4 months experience in my life, just because it was cool, it was neat, I learned something, but there's more interesting things to do in the world, like build tremendous value for your customers, than just prove that you're smarter than a bunch of casino people who aren't particularly smart, right? Like,
And the team, like follow-up question on this, the team has all ended up being successful entrepreneurs, right? Like there's always this entrepreneurial spirit within what you've been doing as a
I mean, I
team.
wouldn't say all of them, but people are in different walks of life. One woman is a tenured professor. A couple of people are still playing blackjack or poker or whatever. Like, but the number of like very, very successful entrepreneurs that came out of the team is impressive. Like, I'm not the most successful person that I've done really well, but like there's people who've done better. There's people like John Herstick who started some very, very large successful companies like SolidWorks. Like, I don't know, Yu Chun Lee. There's a few of these people who just built really big businesses. But I don't think any of them really regret doing blackjack. I think they all felt like they learned a lot and they had fun, and it was teamwork. So yeah.
And the last one is spread love in organizations.
Well, love makes the world go round. So yeah, organizations ought to consist of ties between people who deeply care about each other, who bond, and who are not indifferent. People shouldn't be totally formal. I mean, yeah, you can keep your friends' social circle separate from your work circle if you want, but the work circle should also have real emotional, personal meaning to you. You shouldn't be indifferent to the people with whom you spend much of your life. And you got to love your customers. I mean, you're not going to really ever get anywhere if you don't love your customers. You can feel it.
Any final word of wisdom, Semyon, for leaders around the world?
The leaders don't need any of my wisdom. And the people who are hoping to get my wisdom to become leaders are unlikely to transform themselves into leaders. I think some of it just comes from within. I mean, there's obvious advice, like you don't want in the military, the leader is at the front, not in the back, right? Like the leader leads, and and inspires and doesn't just stand behind and tell people what to do. But I think those are all cliches at this point. So, I think you have to figure out what's important to you and what you believe in and sort of run with it. And sometimes the leadership just naturally happens.
Thank you so much, Semyon, for being with me today and for this incredible chat.
You're welcome. It was nice being here. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to Spread Love in Organizations podcast. Subscribe and connect with us on SpreadLoveIO.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. Most importantly, spread love in your organizations and spread the word around you to inspire others and amplify this movement our world so desperately needs.